Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
When I first saw the condo, it seemed like a dream come true. The property had this nostalgic charm, a kind of old-world New England vibe. Sure, it needed some updates, but the price was right, and I figured it was a solid investment. By March 2024, I was a proud condo owner. Or so I thought. The reality of this place unraveled like a bad soap opera, and I ended up leaving just 7 months later, angrier than I've ever been in my life. From the moment I moved in, things felt off. The property manager, who I later learned was also the treasurer and owned multiple units, seemed to have an iron grip on the place. His demeanor was abrasive, to say the least. The first time I encountered him, he barked orders at me about where to park and how to dispose of my moving boxes. I chalked it up to a bad day, but I soon realized this was his default mode. Curious about the rules and regulations that would govern my new home, I carefully crafted a professional email requesting copies of the governing documents. I made sure to be specific, asking for the complete set of documents including the master deed, declaration of trust, and any recent amendments. The silence that followed was deafening. Weeks passed and my inbox remained empty, save for the routine maintenance notifications and generic community updates. I began to wonder if my request had somehow been lost in the digital ether, so I decided to follow up with a polite, carefully worded reminder. The response, when it finally arrived, was nothing like I expected. Instead of the helpful documentation I had anticipated, I received a terse, almost threatening email warning me to cease all communication about the documents. The language was curt, borderline hostile, suggesting that my persistent inquiries were unwelcome and potentially troublesome. The email left me stunned, a knot forming in my stomach as I read and reread the message. Red flags were waving frantically in my mind, warning me that something was fundamentally wrong with this community's management. Yet, being new to the property and wanting to believe the best, I tried to stay optimistic. I told myself it was probably just a misunderstanding, that surely there was a reasonable explanation for this bizarre interaction. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would consume the next 7 months of my life. One day, while chatting with a neighbor by the mailboxes, I struck up a casual conversation about the community and how things were going. As we exchanged pleasantries, she leaned in closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Have you heard about the Facebook group for residents?" she asked, glancing around as if to ensure no one else was listening. Intrigued, I nodded, prompting her to continue. "It's where we actually find out what's going on around here," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously. She explained that the group served as a vital lifeline for residents seeking updates on community events, maintenance issues, and even the board's controversial decisions. It became clear that many residents relied on this platform to share information and support each other in navigating the complexities of living under the HOA's rules. However, her expression turned serious as she added a warning, "But be careful. The board hates it." Her tone was laced with concern, and I could sense the weight of her words. She recounted stories of residents who had faced backlash for voicing their opinions or sharing grievances about the management in that very group. It was evident that the HOA viewed this online forum as a threat to their authority, and they were not shy about retaliating against those who dared to speak out. This revelation sent a chill down my spine. I had already sensed an undercurrent of tension in the community, but hearing it confirmed made me realize just how precarious our situation was. The Facebook group was not just a source of information, it was also a battleground where residents fought for their voices to be heard amidst an oppressive regime. Intrigued, I joined the group that evening. What I found was eye-opening. Photos of crumbling infrastructure, screenshots of hostile emails from management, and discussions about potential legal action filled the page. It was clear that a group of frustrated owners had created this space to share information and support each other. I started commenting occasionally, mostly offering encouragement or sharing research I'd done on condo law. It felt good to connect with others who shared my concerns, but my involvement didn't go unnoticed. One morning, as I sipped my coffee and scrolled through my emails, my heart nearly stopped. There, nestled between innocuous work messages and promotional newsletters, was an email from the property manager. The subject line alone made my stomach churn. "Regarding your online activities." With trembling fingers I opened the message, and the content sent a wave of cold dread washing over me. "We've noticed your activity on that hate site," it read. the accusatory tone unmistakable even in text form. The email continued, "I suggest you remove yourself if you don't want any problems." The threat, thinly veiled as it was, hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I read and reread the message, trying to process the implications of what I was seeing. As the initial shock wore off, a barrage of questions flooded my mind. How were they monitoring us? The Facebook group was supposed to be a private space for residents to communicate freely. Were they somehow infiltrating the group, or did they have other means of surveillance? And what exactly did they mean by problems? The vagueness of the threat only added to its menacing nature. Would they start issuing fines, harass me in person, or was there something even worse in store for those who dared to participate in online discussions? The chill that ran down my spine wasn't just from fear. It was the cold realization that my home, the place where I should feel safest, had become a battlefield. And in this moment, I felt like I was standing alone on the front lines, exposed and vulnerable to an enemy I couldn't see but who clearly had their eyes on me. I ignored the threat, but it wasn't the last. Over the next few months, I received several more emails accusing me of writing specific posts, demanding explanations for innocuous comments, and generally trying to intimidate me into silence. The situation came to a head in April when I received notice of two $200 fines. One was for using a smiley face emoji on another resident's post. The other was for writing, "Stay strong. Change is coming," a comment I'd made about the arrival of spring after a long winter. When I asked for clarification on these fines, I was told I'd have to attend a board meeting to appeal. That meeting was a farce. The property manager, red-faced and seething, pounded his fist on the table and demanded I reveal the identities of other group members. When I refused, citing privacy concerns, he unleashed a string of profanities that made me genuinely fear for my safety. As the months wore on, the situation only deteriorated. In August, I received my monthly fee statement and nearly fell out of my chair. Tacked onto my regular dues were 12 additional $200 fines, totaling $2,400. Apparently, the board had decided to retroactively fine people for past infractions on the Facebook group. Their justification? They dubbed me a group expert based on my occasional research-based comments. Now, they claimed, I was responsible for moderating other people's posts. If someone said something they didn't like and I didn't remove it or ban the poster, actions I had no power to take, I was fined. Even more absurdly, they were fining multiple experts for the same posts, essentially quadrupling their income from each perceived slight. I was livid. This felt like blatant harassment, a clear abuse of power. But what could I do? There was no oversight agency to report them to, and the cost of legal action seemed prohibitive. The stress was taking a toll on my mental health and affecting my work. I found myself jumping every time my phone buzzed, dreading another threatening email or notice of fines. After months of this psychological warfare, I made the difficult decision to sell my condo. I loved my home, but I couldn't continue living under this oppressive regime. The market was good, and I hoped for a quick sale so I could wash my hands of this mess. But even that process wasn't without its challenges. To obtain the necessary certificate showing no outstanding debts, I was forced to pay all the accumulated fines plus legal fees. It felt like extortion, but I saw no other way out. With a heavy heart and a significantly lighter bank account, I closed on the sale in October 2024. As I drove away from the property for the last time, a mix of emotions swirled within me. Relief, certainly, at escaping the toxic environment, but also anger and frustration at the injustice of it all. How could a small group of people wield so much unchecked power? How many other residents were suffering in silence, afraid to speak up? I considered pursuing legal action, but the thought of prolonging my involvement with these people made me physically ill. Instead, I decided to channel my energy into advocating for better oversight of HOAs and condo associations. I started researching similar cases in other states, connecting with housing rights activists, and sharing my story whenever I could. The experience left me wary of ever buying into a condo association again. The lack of transparency, the arbitrary enforcement of rules, and the potential for abuse of power were just too great a risk. I found myself gravitating towards single-family homes or rentals where I wouldn't be at the mercy of a board's whims. Months after moving, I still found myself checking that Facebook group occasionally. Part of me hoped to see news of a successful rebellion against the board, or at least some consequences for their actions. But change seemed slow in coming, if it was coming at all. The whole ordeal felt like a surreal nightmare at times. How could this happen in a supposedly civilized society? Where were the checks and balances? The more I dug into the issue, the more I realized how common these problems were. Across the country, homeowners were battling overreaching boards, struggling to access financial records and facing arbitrary fines and restrictions. I thought about the other owners still living there, especially the elderly residents on fixed incomes who couldn't easily pick up and move. How many of them were suffering in silence, afraid to speak up for fear of retaliation? The injustice of it all continued to gnaw at me. There were moments when I questioned whether I should have fought harder, stayed and tried to change the system from within. But then I'd remember the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the feeling of walking on eggshells in my own home. No, I made the right choice for my mental health and well-being. Still, the experience changed me. I became more politically active, attending city council meetings and writing to my state representatives about the need for better oversight of HOAs and condo associations. I connected with housing rights organizations and shared my story, hoping it might help push for meaningful reform. I also became more cautious in my dealings with others, more aware of how power can corrupt even in small-scale situations. The experience made me value transparency and accountability in all aspects of my life, from my workplace to my personal relationships. As time passed, the raw anger began to fade, replaced by a sort of weary determination. I knew the fight for fair housing practices and resident rights was far from over. But I also knew that by speaking out and sharing my experience, I was contributing to a larger conversation that needed to happen. In quiet moments, I sometimes found myself wondering about the board members and the property manager. What drove them to behave this way? Were they simply drunk on the small amount of power they held, or was there something deeper at play? I doubted I'd ever truly understand their motivations. Looking back, I realized how naive I'd been when I first bought the condo. I'd assumed that because we lived in a democratic society, things like transparent governance and fair treatment would be a given, even in a small community like a condo association. The reality had been a harsh wake-up call. The experience left me with a newfound appreciation for the importance of community engagement and vigilance. I vowed that wherever I lived in the future, I would stay informed and involved, doing my part to prevent the kind of unchecked power I'd witnessed. As I settled into my new home, a small house with no HOA in sight, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. The ordeal had been costly, both financially and emotionally, but I had survived, and in doing so, I'd found a new purpose, to ensure that others wouldn't have to go through what I did. The story of my 7-month condo nightmare might have ended, but the larger fight for fairness and accountability in housing communities was far from over, and I was determined to play my part in that ongoing struggle, one day at a time. Sue him in court. Depending on how much you lost, you can make him hurt. Make them all hurt. Tortious interference. It's when a legal entity person knowingly engages in conduct to intentionally cost another party money. Again, depending on how much it cost you, it may be small claims, $7,000 or less per person, or it may be a higher court which would need a lawyer on contingency. Always on contingency. Edit. I am not a lawyer. I look stuff up. Wow. Not a fan of Florida, but this behavior is an example why Florida cracked down on HOAs. There are criminal and civil laws that govern our lives. There are also just laws of common decency, how we should treat one another, especially as we live within a community. Believe HOAs are mini versions of Lord of the Flies, sir. If you find some why, hold everyone accountable. This HOA is a textbook example of power-hungry tyrants running amok. It's time to fight fire with fire. Document everything, gather allies among your neighbors, and consider legal action. These board members are clearly violating basic rights and abusing their authority. Don't let them get away with this blatant harassment and extortion. If enough residents band together, you can force a change in leadership or even dissolve the HOA entirely. Remember, they work for you, not the other way around. It's high time someone taught these wannabe dictators a lesson in democracy and fair governance. Stand your ground and don't let them bully you into submission. The law is on your side, even if they pretend otherwise.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.